Thank you for joining us for Evolving Economy this year. I'm Robin Lee, investor at GGV Capital. I'm so thrilled to welcome our next panelists, Carolyn Childers and Caroline Fairchild. We'll be discussing leadership in the new normal. Luckily, I've really gotten a chance to know both our amazing panelists for many years now. Caroline Fairchild, we were both living in the Bay Area before when we first met, and now we're in New York City. And Carolyn, we've gotten to know each other for 3 years. As a founding member of Chief New York, I'm really excited both as an investor and also a member to be able to have the opportunity to interview you on stage. So let's get started. I will kick it off to Carolyn, and if you could please introduce yourself and a little bit more about Chief.
Awesome. Thrilled to be here. Excited to do this panel with two women that I deeply respect. I'm Carolyn Childers. I am the CEO and co-founder of Chief. Chief is a professional network that's focused on senior executive women under the mission of driving more women into positions of leadership and keeping them there. So this panel on the new ways of leadership and this new normal that we all find ourselves is one that I'm deeply passionate about. So thrilled to be here and having this discussion.
Yeah, and for those of you in the audience right now, my name is Caroline Fairchild. I'm also similarly so thrilled to be here. Huge fans of Robin and Carolyn. I am an editor-at-large at LinkedIn, where my goal is to make sure that professional news and views are on the platform that you all want to read. I have a specific focus on equity in the workplace, specifically gender and racial equity. So I look to leaders like Robin and Carolyn as sources sometimes to write about the trends that are going on. And this, of course, the pandemic has had just an outsized impact on how leaders are thinking about leadership, how they're thinking about the new normal, and how they're thinking about returning to the office right now. So I'm excited to have this conversation with all of you.
It's actually kind of crazy how it's already been a year and a half. Like, time has really kind of in many ways stood still. Caroline, you mentioned you're an editor at large and covering this topic specifically, and you've done so many interviews. I've watched a lot of the videos and live shows you've done, and you've covered every leader across like tech to even the Olympics. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen in this past 1.5 years, and what are some opportunities you see?
Yeah, you mentioned those interviews, Robin. I think tomorrow is going to be our 275th episode under quarantine of LinkedIn News Live, where we're bringing on leaders to discuss how the pandemic has changed the way that they think about leadership. So it's been a ride, but I want to take everyone back to the beginning of the pandemic because it makes me look foolish, but it's also a funny story. I remember when we first came under quarantine, I got into my home office, which I'm still in right now, and I thought to myself, what am I going to write about while we're under quarantine? I write about women in business. I write about equity in the workplace. I'm not going to have anything to write about. And of course, as you all know in the audience, I couldn't have been more wrong. It has been such a tremendous year in terms of upheaval of how leaders are thinking about what leadership looks like, what it sounds like, how they're speaking to their employees. And I think when I think about like where we are right now, it's just a different chapter. And so right now, a lot of leaders are thinking about return to office right now and what that looks like. And I think a lot of people saw a light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to returning to the office, getting back to some sort of semblance of normal. But then the Delta variant came, and now leaders are having to completely rethink that as well. What I will say is that I am optimistic about a lot of the things that have changed when it comes to work. Flexibility used to be something that a perk that a lot of working women were asking for. It was the #1 perk that they were asking for on LinkedIn prior to the pandemic starting, and a lot of employers weren't giving it. This pandemic has kind of been this whole experiment where we've proved out that flexible work can work. And so I hope moving forward that more employers are offering that as an option, because I think it'll be a boon, particularly for working women.
Yeah, I would just jump in and add as well, the last 1.5 years have been so many different moments of time. It almost feels like the Olympics of leadership and people management and all of that. It's just been every few months there's something new that you are working through as a leader. The thing that's really interesting right now is, as Caroline was talking about, with everybody trying to figure out what the next generation of work looks like and this hybrid model or not hybrid model and how we go about it. I actually at first was actually fearful about the hybrid model because a lot of times it will be the underrepresented communities that may opt into the remote work, and what would that do in terms of actually allowing for promotion opportunities, and would that mean that more of the underrepresented communities would actually fall out of the workforce? And I think what gives me like such optimism now is that anything that has to be done deliberately always benefits underrepresented communities. And like, this is the first time where I think all companies, any company has to like rethink the way that they work and can't just go by like the ways that we've always been doing. And so I think it's this really optimistic moment in time where everybody has to rethink things in a way that will inherently benefit so many of the underrepresented communities, women in particular, who right now, how many of them have fallen out of the workplace over this pandemic. That's been a huge shift. I remember like December of 2020, like the jobs report where 100% of the people that left the workforce were women. And I'm really hopeful that as we start to define this new way of working, that we can do it with the intentionality that allows for so many more people to participate in the workplace.
Yeah, I just want to jump in a little bit and respond to Carolyn, because I think she made a great point. This hybrid model is only going to work if companies do it 100% correct, because what we're seeing on LinkedIn is that Black employees in particular, they're hesitant to come back into the office because their experiences when they were in the office weren't as great as their white counterparts. And so if we have this hybrid model where the underrepresented groups, as Carolyn was saying, are at home and companies aren't thinking about structures that ensure that they're getting retained and promoted at the same rate, we're going to have a huge problem. So this really is, I think, a moment of opportunity for the best employers who want the best talent to figure this out.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned around women in the workforce, particularly around women working, I saw a stat that you published, Caroline, that 57% of women were working now, which is as low as it's ever been since 1988, which is shocking, and it's very good that we have something like Chief, who now has over 6,000 powerful women executives across New York, Boston, DC, Chicago, SFLA, who are empowering women and trying to get them to adapt and be supported. And so, Carolyn, have you seen kind of any trends in the Chief community? I know you did some surveys around the C-suite women, and many of them are also working moms, but only we've only come so far on how to make it more sustainable in the workforce. So would love to hear any findings that you've come across.
Yeah, I am so thankful that something like Chief existed through this period of time, because there is truly no playbook as a leader overall, but as a woman leader who is often, the one taking on so much of the childcare and the burdens at home. And so having a community like Chief where you're able to, work through a playbook together of what is this new normal? How can we get through this? How do we work through this and just give each other support through all of that? I think was incredible to be able to see. But I do think that there's a real need for companies and government to step forward and really think through, this pandemic was not equal across all communities. How can we support people that are being affected at an even greater degree? And really thinking through what the childcare system is and all of that, because as much as we think we've kind of learned a lot about what remote work will look like, this is not the normal way that remote work will actually manifest itself. This is remote work where you also have to have 100% of the childcare duties. This is remote work where you are in a quarantine and don't have the support of a community around you. And so I'm looking forward to figuring out and for women at Chief to help figure out what does remote work actually look like when there are those necessary support systems around everybody to be able to allow for a really meaningful remote work experience.
Caroline, have you seen any best practices that certain companies are putting in place now? And do you think they're here to stay?
Yeah, I think I'd point to two things that Carolyn kind of touched on a little bit. I think two main themes that I'm seeing, one is more theoretical and one is more practical. In the theoretical camp, I think that everyone is redefining what leadership looks like. And the key buzzword that I've heard throughout this since the beginning of the pandemic is just empathetic leadership and thinking about leadership through an empathetic lens. I don't think I could name 5 interviews that I had prior to the pandemic where a CEO talked about empathy, talked about compassion in the workplace. And then all of a sudden, every CEO that I was speaking with was talking about the importance of leading with empathy. And I think that tenet, if we can actually see that scale to more companies and have more leaders really thinking about that through that lens, it's going to change the dynamic in terms of how people think about their relationship with work and what they're sharing in terms of what they're coming to work and their issues that they're facing at home. I think that that's been a huge boon because during the pandemic, we couldn't hide the fact that we had these lives outside of work. They're in these little boxes that we're all in all day while we're on Zoom calls. So that's like the more theoretical. I think practically, as Carolyn was saying, we're seeing this wave where care and the care economy is now not necessarily seen as a personal issue, but is being seen as a business issue. And that, as we all know from data with the gender pay gap, as we know what happens to working mothers when they come in and out of maternity leave, I think that is going to be critical to solving some of the issues that Chief is trying to address in terms of getting more women into leadership positions. And we can fix that critical period where a mother is feeling like she has to be at home versus at work. I think we're going to see a whole different dynamic. So those are really 2 of the most promising things. And the other thing from a best practices standpoint is I think the best companies are thinking about flexible work, not from a come into the office Monday, Wednesday, Friday, work from home Tuesday, Thursday, but more flexible working hours. Slack is doing this thing where they basically have like a 4-hour window where they expect workers to be on and to be participants and be able to be in meetings. And other than that, they're saying get your work done when you want to get your work done. And so if we can see more companies doing that, I think that we're going to see a lot of change when it comes to what leadership looks like and who's getting ahead in the workplace.
Yeah. I want to take actually a step back as you talk about empathy. When we first invested in Chief and as a founding member, it was all physical, right? And in a sense that we all came together in person, had our core groups. And, when the pandemic came, everything kind of restarted. But I would love, Carolyn, for you to just take us through that journey, because not only were you a startup in this era, right, where you had to go through that yourself, but the entire community had to do that as well. And so, how did you kind of lead with empathy here, and also support the leaders that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely say that, for our investors at the very beginning of this pandemic, we were probably at the very top of the list of everybody's, how are they going to get through this? Everything that they do is in person. Where's this business going to go? And I think, the mantra of never waste a good crisis is really true for us, because we very quickly had to pivot all of our services from in-person to virtual. And when we did that, we also just saw this amazing transformation of what the business could be, because it actually completely democratized access to all of our services. You did not have to schlep into a clubhouse in order to get the support that you're looking for. You were able to tap into that wherever you were. If you were, in the old world, if you were traveling, in the new world, if you were locked into your home or apartment and weren't able to do something like that. And so I think it was a phenomenal transformation that we were able to go through. And it actually made us smarter as we were thinking about our own team, because it also, as we saw the benefits of that, democratization of access, we realized that that's something that we could utilize as we think about our own team and being able to bring in people from all different geographies to be able to work within our team, and to be able to recruit in places that do have more representation from certain demographics, et cetera. So it's just been a really amazing thing to go through. I do think that one of the best parts of being a co-founder is that you have 2 people that are going through 2 completely different experiences through the pandemic. So my co-founder literally was coming back from maternity leave for her 2nd kid as the pandemic started. So we hadn't seen each other in a few months because she was on maternity leave, except for some, social interactions. And, she was going through this herself as somebody who had like a newborn child, a 4-year-old. And it's so amazing to see how much as a company we were working through things and thinking through things differently because there was representation in senior leadership that was going through that experience themselves. And it's all the more reason why a mission like we have at Chief of getting more women into those senior leadership positions, there's just a different frame of mind you have as a leader that's trying to lead with empathy when you have experienced it or understand it or going through it yourself. And it's been great to have her as my kind of co-pilot through all of this to make sure we truly are thinking through the challenges that everybody is having through this whole pandemic.
Yeah, could not agree more. I was also coming back from maternity leave myself, and I remember not being able to see you, and then come back for 1 month, and the COVID virus came, and so everybody went into lockdown there. You mentioned a lot around access to talent, and so the pandemic has really prompted America to reprioritize our work, our health, and specifically our family too. And so how does this new hybrid or remote paradigm impact access to talent? You talked about it a bit, Carolyn, around even for recruiting at Chief, you now can recruit leaders across the US. Caroline, what are you seeing across the leaders that you've interviewed?
Well, I'm working on a story right now I've spoken to like a dozen working mothers at this point who are just terrified about what return to school is going to look like with the Delta variant. And they're thinking about whether they should go part-time. They can't find childcare because there are childcare shortages right now. So I'm pessimistic at this current moment, but I will zoom out a little bit and talk about access to talent a little bit more. I think if you're an employer who is doing the right things to ensure, like we discussed earlier, that the hybrid model can work. And it really is democratization in terms of, it doesn't matter where you work, it's kind of how you're working. I think this really is an opportunity to diversify your workplace. If you think about, I remember 5-6 years ago, maybe it was longer than that, I feel like COVID has completely warped my sense of time. But when I first came to San Francisco and I was covering venture capital and startups, it was just such an insular world. And it still is a very insular world. We have data from LinkedIn that just shows the networks of people who work at startups are unfortunately not as diverse as they should be. And so I think this is an opportunity, particularly if we want to talk about the tech and venture capital industry, to really change that and to really think about how that's going to happen. I think what worries me is if people put up job listings, I'm going to get this stat wrong, but it's something crazy. It's like 800% increase in remote job listings on LinkedIn between this time last year and the year before that, like an insane amount of job listings that are now remote. But if companies are just slapping remote onto a job listing without thinking critically about how they're going to support, retain, and promote that talent, as opposed to the talent that's in the office, I'm going to be writing stories a year from now that is just showing just huge retention problems and just showing how this didn't work. And so this, I think, is really going to be a pivotal moment for the best companies to really show why they're the best places to work. And I think that some companies are leading by example there, but I think the ones that are just trying to slap on labels to things, trying to think in a rushed way about what this is going to look like, are going to be really in a bad place come a year or 2 years from now, once this talent realizes that they can't actually be successful working remotely.
So Caroline, you mentioned a bit about venture capital since you covered that area pretty extensively back when you were in San Francisco. I know, from a VC perspective, we're seeing a lot of funding, particularly booming during COVID, right? We have, when we first headed into the pandemic, it was a lot of fires to put out, like who's going to have enough cash? There's all these PPP loans, right? Are we going to be able to invest in people because we've never met them in person? We've never even did that. But now, it's been a year and a half, and obviously we've been doing way more funding than ever. And, us personally, we've been investing in food, we've been investing in e-commerce, we've been investing in infrastructure, even future of work. And actually, even at that time, we ended up doubling down in Chief, right? And so what are you seeing in terms of funding for particularly female founders? Have you seen any trends? Has it been easier because now that everything's virtual, or actually even more difficult to get time on people's calendars?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing, unfortunately, in the numbers from last year, that although it was a record year for venture capital dollars, we saw a decrease in the amount of funding going to sole female founders. But there are two big trends that we've hit on a little bit during this pandemic, during this conversation, that the pandemic has borne out, that I think will nudge the numbers in the right direction. I think one is just this focus on empathetic leadership, and the fact that people want people in positions of power that are thinking differently about what leadership looks like. And then we also have to talk about how this last summer of 2020 just was a reckoning against systemic racism, and put a huge focus on companies to think about diversity and inclusion, not just as a buzzword, as slapping on diversity and thinking about how many numbers of people they have in their organization or in their portfolio, but really thinking about it from an equity standpoint. And then the righteous reasons that we have to do this is one thing, but I think there's actually an economic reason that we're going to see more female founders, more diverse founders getting big checks, because where the money is and where the opportunities are changing. We talked a little bit about the care economy, but I think I've talked to so many investors who are desperate for solutions in their portfolio to address some of the concerns that working parents have right now. I think that that's going to be a huge opportunity for female founders. We just saw the first billionaire unicorn female healthcare startup in oh gosh, why am I blanking on that name?
Maven.
Maven, thank you. I was going to say Modern Health, and that was incorrect. In Maven, and I think that that's just such a sign, and what they're doing over there is so great. I think if you spoke to the people who are investing in Maven 5 years ago, I don't think that they would think it would be $1 billion company today. So it's amazing to see that happened, and I think that the pandemic had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I've actually even met so many startups, even within the chief community, a lot of female CEOs, even one that's more than one in my core groups. So it's been amazing to see that.
As a female founder who has historically and potentially in the future been looking for funding, I think that one of the amazing things are starting to see some of these categories that Caroline was talking about start to emerge, where whether it's in the care economy, whether it's these female wellness or female health companies, and you're just seeing new categories. You see somebody like Bumble going public and having huge success stories. So you see all of the great aspects of it. But I think the same thing that is happening with the workforce, where the pandemic hit female workers and there was more female workers that were leaving the workforce. You are also probably seeing a similar level of women who are not moving into the founder, not taking on that challenge of stepping forward and becoming a founder right now, because of all of the things that you have to balance. And so I really do hope that in the spur of capital that is out there right now, and all of the funding that you see and all the conversations, that women really do take that leap and go and start to build their own companies, because it's a lot easier to change the world when you're in charge of a new table instead of trying to change the table that you're at, and would be so excited to have more women kind of join on this journey of entrepreneurship.
I've actually even seen a lot of women join startups and companies as independent board members now too, more than ever. I think, obviously there's been some requirements for going public, but even before that, even our portfolio have been working, even particularly with Chief, for example, to find independent board members. And I'm so encouraged by that, and seeing more women around the boardroom, particularly whether it's in a startup or in a public company.
Yeah, fully agree. I also I'm forgetting, I think it might have been Fred Wilson who wrote a piece about kind of a call to action for venture capitalists to potentially give up their board seats that they typically get as part of the terms of funding, to ensure that there is great representation in the boardroom. And so I think it's great that it is top of mind and viewed as a metric that everybody is aligned and wants to put into a much more diverse perspective, that it's not just the companies, it's not just the VCs, it's everybody that is actually really seeing the benefit of having that diverse perspective, and hope that continues, as it may not be at the new buzzy thing that everybody's talking about.
I know we don't have that much time left, but we do have one more. I do have one more question for you both. How do you actually view yourselves as part of the broader work revolution? I know the pandemic is probably not going away anytime soon. So, Caroline, can you kick us off around what you think the future might entail for you?
I was going to start my answer with talking about my own imposter syndrome, but I thankfully think actually 2020 canceled imposter syndrome. It's not that we have to fix women and their imposter syndrome. We have to fix companies that give them imposter syndrome. So I'm going to nix that answer that I had in the back of my head about I can't imagine myself being a part of the workplace revolution. But look, I think my position at LinkedIn is really powerful because LinkedIn is all about connecting people to opportunity, and I see myself as sitting in the center to make sure that those opportunities are given to everyone, regardless of their gender or their race or their socioeconomic background or their sexuality. And so that's really what I'm focused on, and I have this amazing ability to talk to leaders like both of you and share those insights with the broader professional world. But I think more broadly what this pandemic has done is grown my role to think more, not just about content, but about how we can make LinkedIn overall a more equal platform for everyone. And so we have a lot of really exciting projects that we're unrolling this year to really ensure that it's not just a place where, white dudes in venture capital, as much as I love them, can succeed, but that everyone has a really good opportunity to find opportunities on the platform. And I'm lucky to be a part of it.
Carolyn, what's next for Chief?
Yeah. So I think that Chief has had a pretty amazing year and a half. As we were going into the pandemic, we were just starting to think about an additional city outside of New York City where we originally launched. And now we are in 6 different cities and just building a phenomenal network of women across the US, which is really, really exciting. Like I said at the beginning of this, there's not a more needed time for something like Chief, where people have been able to support each other in so many different ways. And I continue to be inspired, similar to what Caroline was just saying, when you ask the question of like, what's your role? You kind of have the humility of like, I'm just one person. What is my role in this whole thing? But I am awed every day about the stories that I hear about the connections that are made within Chief, the support that people find within Chief, and what that allows so many women leaders to be able to do in the world. And we have said so many times that we focus on senior executive women at Chief, and just the ripple effect that can have for these leaders to then go into their organizations to really be pushing leadership in the right way. This is a critical point for people to really be intentionally thinking about how they are supporting their teams and their talent when almost all the ways of working are now up for debate again, and being able to bring people together, to have those dialogues, to have the right representation in the room, that all of the members of the team kind of are thought about as we start to define this new way of working. So really excited about what Chief has been able to do over this period of time. And I think for us, the more people that we can bring into the network, the more people that we can have having voices in those rooms, the better. So I think for us at Chief, what you're going to see is us starting to get to more and more cities. There's wait lists that have been building across all of the cities in the US and even international. And we're excited to just build this network so that that ripple effect can be even bigger.
Thank you. Could not be more excited for all that to happen. I know a lot of even our portfolio are like on those wait lists as well. So yeah. Thank you so much, both of you, for spending the time this morning out of your busy schedules, to hop on and talk to us about your knowledge and your insights that you're seeing in the market. And hopefully we'll, come together again, not the near future, and kind of share some more cases for optimism and kind of reflect back upon what we said here and really see if those changes actually happen. crossing fingers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, ditto. Really appreciate it, and always happy to do everything with GGV. You guys have been an amazing partner to us at Chief, so was really excited to be here.
Thank you.